All right, I am here with the producer of the Charlie Kirk Show. Is that right?
Yes.
And now co-host.
None of us are a host.
Okay.
There is one host.
Okay.
And he is on assignment.
Yes, he is. Nonetheless, you guys have stepped in and taken over Blake Neff along with Andrew Colvin and done a wonderful job. Impossible shoes to fill, but you guys are doing as good as you can. And so let's start with this. I consider Blake Neff the sort of grand vizier of the right, okay? The eminence grise of the new right, okay? No, look, I'm entitled. I'm taking the interviewer's privilege here, okay? And so tell us, Blake Neff, I think actually there's some real interest to know who you are. Who is Blake Neff? Where did Blake Neff come from? Why are you on this stage right now? How did you get here?
Yes, well, you see, 40 years ago, my parents married each other, I suppose. Yeah, no, it's I've had an interesting career, I suppose. I sort of fell into it by accident, like a lot of people. In undergrad, kind of planned on going to law school. That's a common fate of many word cells. And then I realized I felt like all of the lawyers I knew kind of wanted to jump out of buildings.
Yeah.
And I thought, I don't need to do this right away. I don't need to hard commit to this. So I looked around at what else I could do. And I was writing for the Dartmouth Review, the conservative paper at my school. And you could apply for this one-year fellowship to go be a reporter or a journalist at various outlets.
Yes.
And I ended up at The Hill in D.C. The Hill, the publication, I wasn't a Capitol flunky.
Yeah.
And I didn't hate it. And so a year later, I still didn't really feel passionately about going to law school. And I'd done everything that you could do except go.
Yeah.
And there was an opening at the Daily Caller, which was run by Tucker Carlson at the time. So I applied to that. There was a very brief interview process. It was basically just Tucker Carlson would call you on the phone and talk to you for a little bit.
Yes,
and it kind of went from there. It's very funny because you think of how famous he is now, and he was a guy on TV, but he was not ultra omega famous at that time, I feel. Went to the Caller for 2.5 years. That was a ton of fun. We covered the 2016 election, really got involved in a lot of interesting stuff.
And a friend of mine, acquaintance of ours, Scott Greer, was he one of your colleagues?
Yes,
Yeah.
He and I would talk a lot because he literally worked the night shift, and I just had a habit of staying late because I would procrastinate on things and just finish them late, and I just do that a lot. So we would hang out a lot there, and then when after the 2016 election, Tucker began his show on Fox, and so he asked me to go aboard as the writer for it, so I was that for 3.5 years.
Yeah.
And I started with Charlie in 2022, and the less said about the 2-year intermediate period between those, the better.
Well, we'll keep that off to the side for now, but let's rewind the clock a little bit because we're about the same age or close enough that we probably went through a somewhat similar trajectory in terms of ideology and how we ended up in this kind of weird space we might call the new right. And you said you were at Dartmouth Review. I think Harmeet Dillon is an alum.
Was she?
Maybe.
She might be. She might be. I keep forgetting that she's another one of the. There's a lot of them because Dinesh D'Souza. He was famously an early guy at the Review. Laura Ingraham.
Very good.
They were on the Review at the same time, I believe.
An illustrious legacy there.
Yes.
Okay, so but let me ask the question more straightforwardly. How did you come to take on the beliefs you now take on? And let me say this, when we entered the world of conservative politics, it looked very different. Now, we have some older viewers who might remember what that looked like in the 2010s and, the Paul Ryan days of the Republican Party, and there was very little interest in things like immigration, and there were certain questions you couldn't even ask, let alone pose the answers to, and we've come a very long way since that time. So I'm curious, from your perspective, how have things changed since that 2010s period, that first Trump administration? What are some of the new sort of impulses and interests on the right that's animating the right now that was different from then? And then what do you see as the sort of part you've played in that? Because I know you're a modest guy, but I want to draw out of you some of the influence you've had on some of these key figures on the right, including Tucker and Charlie.
Yeah, well, to start at the beginning, I remember an important moment for me. I did the New Criterion, that conservative arts journal in New York. It's kind of a bit of a Dartmouth racket.
The great Roger Kimball, by the way.
Yeah, Roger Kimball, amazing guy. but a lot of it, at least at the time, was definitely a bit of a Dartmouth racket. James Pinero, Dartmouth guy, Emily Esfahani Smith, she was there, Dartmouth woman. And so they would have an intern every term, and it was a Dartmouth person quite frequently.
Okay.
And I remember being there, and what stood out to me is they did a panel event about where one of the things that was featured, or maybe the primary thing featured, it was Charles Murray. And he was talking about a book of his that wasn't out yet. It was upcoming in 6 months or a year or so. And it was a book called Coming Apart.
Yes.
And I think a lot of people who were around, gosh, I can't believe that was 12, 13 years ago. A lot of people were very affected by that book. Coming Apart was Charles Murray. He was laying out the facts on, I think the subtitle was like the state of white America.
Yes.
And what he was focusing on was there's a lot of people in America who are really headed in a bad direction.
Yep.
They're going on disability, they're not working, they're becoming NEETs, which that wasn't really a term used much at the time, but it was describing that. They're getting hooked on drugs. There's all the deaths and despair that was becoming a prominent thing at the time.
And a sort of breakdown of these community, the sort of community fabric that had hold in old America together.
Yeah, and it was that, and then also seeing this at Dartmouth up close. That I grew up, I think a lot of people did, in a bit of a bubble of, in a red state, a relatively prosperous subpart of a red state, and sort of you can be oblivious to the realization, wait, everything I care about is in very steep decline. And then you go on campus and you realize, okay, no one on campus is religious really, or a very small share, and they're very alienated from what you see as core American values. And on top of that, you start looking at the numbers and realizing, oh, and we're also doing huge amounts of immigration of people who also don't have affinity for that. So how's this all going to end? And it's that realization, everything I care about on current trajectory is totally screwed. And I think that's what causes a big radical revision for a lot of people. And I just remember being like having a depressive spell. Probably the winter of my junior year that was just rooted in this realization, everything I care about is really going downhill in a bad way. What am I going to do about this?
So this was very obvious to me. It was obvious, it sounds like, to you, at least once your eyes were open to it, you couldn't unsee it.
Exactly.
And it's Charles Murray, but it was also people like Robert Putnam pulling alone. So this was, and at the time, and I'll just say this for the audience, Robert Putnam's a liberal sociologist at Harvard. This wasn't just a strict partisan Republican issue. And in fact, you were least likely to hear sympathetic arguments about these problems from the right at the time. And so why was this thing that was obvious to us, that we were seeing, so difficult for the conservative establishment, in your view, to wrap their minds around and then finally start doing something about it?
Honestly, I think part of it is just it was a painful thing to admit. And it's just the same way in one's personal life. It's difficult to get out of a relationship that's going badly because the actual act of extracting is very painful. It's difficult to admit you have a problem. And part of admitting, for example, that the level of immigration we've been doing for so long was a bad idea, is you'd really have to admit, we messed it up really bad, didn't we? And you see this in Europe as well, where the Tories, they struggle to admit in the UK that the Boris wave, their level of immigration was bad because it's sort of, we broke something that we really cannot fix. And similar thing in America, if you have to entertain the possibility, America switching to the mode of immigration it did may have been the one generation kill shot to America being a superpower, that is a very dark thing to take in. But we do have to confront reality, and it's a challenge, and I think young people are more prepared to do that than a lot of older people who'd really been in that, and they accepted these very convenient narratives of, natural conservatives. They'll all assimilate very breezily. Pollyanna
I think
views.
we also got hoodwinked into this idea that you were betraying your values, you were betraying your moral turpitude by just acknowledging that these problems existed. So there was just so much pressure militating against an honest, clear-eyed acknowledgement of these problems. And actually, this segues into another question I have for you, which is, when you got to the Charlie Kirk Show, and I don't know the exact timeline here, but I think it's apparent to everyone that Charlie's own beliefs started to evolve during this period. And, he was a young guy, and that just happens naturally as people are younger and they start to read more and see more. And to Charlie's great credit, unlike maybe older versions of mainstream conservatives, he didn't close himself off to the possibility that he might have started with the wrong set of assumptions.
Yeah, he had this very brilliant, he had this incredible level of honesty about himself. So where so many other people would be defensive about their old views, I was, I thought this, I was right at the time.
Yeah.
He was so entertaining and refreshing. He'd say, we would run into this, annoying and pro-immigration argument, and he'd be like, this sounds like old Charlie. Oh, it's so bad. He had this total humility about it, that I was wrong in the past and I changed. And some people would ask, they'll ask if I did it. And I'll be honest, I did not. Mm-hmm. His big moment of evolution, I think, was 2020. I think COVID, George Floyd, frankly, the Floydapalooza, those all affected him a great deal, even on immigration.
Yeah.
And also just he married Erica. He became a dad. He became he was already Christian, but he really began diving into that, and all of that affected him very profoundly, and drove an evolution that we're seeing in a lot of other people now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I actually think, I've said this before, but other than Trump, I think Charlie was the singular figure responsible for pushing the sort of center of gravity of American conservatism to where it is now, where we can have these open and honest conversations about what are very difficult and challenging issues. And so, my next question for you then is, okay, we've come around to this place now where we can talk about these things, we can acknowledge problems that were previously just in the closet, these sort of skeletons that we couldn't address. But what we haven't quite solved yet is the question of what to do about it. How do we execute on the solutions to fixing these problems? And so I ask you, as a guy who, and I say this with all sincerity, seems to sort of understand on some intuitive level where the sort of heartbeat of American sentiment is. How do we go about solving some of these problems? How do we convince the American people not only what we have to do, but how we go about doing those things?
It's definitely a huge challenge. The biggest source of the challenge is we haven't had enough turnover even of Republican politicians to make sure, we have a majority that will actually act on this. And some of that's just going to progress one election at a time, and we have to hope it goes as fast as possible, because this is not an infinity time thing. There is a sense that you're running out of time to actually resolve this. But I think one thing that is being learned, especially in the second Trump term, is the amount of... You want people to realize that there's almost this myth in Washington of political capital, where anything you want to do, it's like money, and once you spend it, the money is gone and you can't go anywhere else. When a lot of politics is actually the opposite, where achieving something gives you more political capital to do additional things. And the best example of this is the border. Yeah. Shutting down the border doesn't mean Trump spent his capital on that and can't do other things. That has been pure upside to Trump. He solved a cataclysmic problem, and he did it instantly and overnight. And that should invite you to think, what are other problems that we actually could solve instantly and overnight? And nothing's quite as easy as that, because we had a good Supreme Court environment for that. But I think the DEI thing that President Trump has pursued is another example where he's able, by staking out an aggressive, immediate position, he forced a total recalibration of what's at stake in this issue, what are we allowed to do about it. He's forcing all the courts to start responding right away. And I think we're actually seeing that cascade continue. Everyone was reading that Compact article this week about what happened to white men during the Great Awakening. And suddenly it's powerfully uncool to be this unironic shill for old-timey DEI. A win creates additional wins. And one thing I don't like is there is a bit of a emotional trauma on the right that drives, I call it emotional incontinence, where people are a little addicted to negativity. They're addicted to wanting to feel betrayed or let down. There's something appealing about that, the strong emotions you feel as a result. And it encourages people to do unproductive things. They say, everything fails. Let's blow it all up. Let's steamroll every judge. And this was a conversation I would have with Charlie this year. And I would say, Charlie, there may come a day where you need to ignore a federal judge because they say something just too outrageous. But instead of just doing it the first time you're really mad about something, you should think in advance. What would justify this? How would you go about it? And you have to plan for these things. And if you do that, you will get more political wins.
Yes, very simple. You win by winning.
You win by winning.
This is simple.
And you win by
logic.
stopping to think. It's so easy to be a take boy. It's so easy to fly off the handle. It's so easy to be really, really emotionally overwrought about things. It's not quite as cool to say we can get big wins if we just think what's the good political strategy here.
Yep.
And I'm a dork who plays a lot of tabletop historical simulations. It got me accused.
Don't say this on air.
It got me accused of being a master strategist by certain people on the internet in the last week. But I think back to that, where I think in terms of politics. Well, what terrain do you want to be fighting on? One of the things I did with Tucker was I had us do a segment where the AP had reported, oh, you can bring child brides into the U.S. And you can bring a 14-year-old into the U.S. as long as they're marrying some guy, and like this is allowed. Yeah. And I said we should run a thing and just say, hey, Congress, vote on this. Can we ban child brides and force the Democrats to vote against it?
Right.
And is that a total solve on immigration? No, not even close. But vote on things where you look good and they look bad, and as long as you control Congress, you can force that.
Yes, yes. So this is the good message. We need to win. We need to find places where we can stack up easy wins. And these things, however small they are, accrue over time.
They do.
Turn into big wins. So Blake Neff, the man behind the curtain, thank you for being here. It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, John.